Okay, it's time to begin. We are in Matthew 25 to begin this morning. Matthew 25. Let me run through our prayer list, and then Jean will lead us in prayer. If you have your bulletin, I have some additions today, but I want to go through all of it. Janiah Brinkley, you remember that's Albert Brinkley's granddaughter, she has been diagnosed with pneumonia. And so they've requested we keep her in our prayers, and his nephew is in the hospital with pneumonia as well. So they're dealing with quite a bit. Also, Kurt Barnes told me that his friend Bob Gorman, his wife passed away yesterday or Friday, and he requested we keep Bob in our prayers. Sue Evans is recovering from ankle replacement surgery. Cheryl Barnes is hoping to get test results this week. Arlie Benvinia dealing with tests. Bill French dealing with a diagnosis of stage 3 glioblastoma. Patty Eskridge, that's Patrick's sister, she's dealing with some health issues. Kurt did get his surgery scheduled, and the surgery will be in Miami on the 26th, early on the 26th, I think. Vinny Rubio is being treated for his cancer. Austin Petty's being treated for cancer. Alicia Solomon is having a great deal of pain issues with her feet. Tamika Dawes, that's April Shelt's friend. She's going through chemo treatments for cancer. Bella Wallbauer is being treated for a torn ACL. Nick Fries is going to have surgery on the 19th. That's the friend of the Shelts, and he has tumors in his liver. They're going to try to take care of that. Jeff Nilsson, who's been on our prayer list, he was the friend of the Wallbauers that had dealt with a significant heart attack. He did pass away this week, so they requested we keep his family in our prayers. Vinny's brother, Richard, dealing with a brain tumor. He did have successful surgery this week. They were encouraged by what they were able to accomplish, and so he'll have treatment now for that. And a friend of the Jordans, Jeff Nilsson, was working this week, had a major heart attack and passed away. He has a young family, teenage boys, so certainly keep that family in your prayers as well. It's a long list, isn't it? Yes. Okay, Gloria Wesley. Is she on the long-term list? Yes, okay. Okay, I'll leave her on the long-term. So, Gloria, keep everybody on the long-term list as well on your prayers, but especially at this time, Gloria has requested that. Okay, if there's nobody else for the prayer list, I do want to add the Friday night. Friday night we had the Mother's Day Fellowship. That was really a good fellowship. I know there were 40-some-odd women who participated. I know they had a great evening. There were 10 men that helped serve. We were amazing. It was just an incredible night. Yes. And we were very careful with portions that we were handed out to the ladies, so there's lots of leftovers for the men later. No, but it was a good evening. I hope that everybody will participate as those opportunities come up earlier, because that's a really good chance to get to know each other better and fellowship with each other, and it's very encouraging, things like that. So, okay, if there's nothing else, Gene, huh? Saturday, yesterday was good at Palm Beach Lakes Men's Day. We had 6. We had 6 from here that went down to that yesterday. It was a very good day. I think there were 80 people that showed up was the final count. Okay. All right, Gene will lead us in prayer. Yes. What, Valerie, last name? Okay, remember the Burley family then. Okay, Gene will lead us in prayer.
Father in heaven, we are indeed thankful and humble at the opportunity of this intercession with you to give thanks and to remember especially all of the sacrifices that you've made on our behalf, and especially your Son. Help us to center our minds this morning on the great things that he has done and what he means to us and what he means to the world. Father, we're especially mindful this morning of the sick of this congregation, the people who are going through tests and illnesses, and the families that surround them and keep them strong and support them. We want to especially pray for each other and be mindful of each other's needs. Open our eyes to the opportunities that we have to serve them and to serve you. This morning, as we go through our lesson, let us be mindful of the way that Jesus served others, and that we may serve others also, as an example of taking him as an example. Help Terry to say all the things that he has prepared and have a ready recollection of this class. Bless us as we go through the study. Forgive us of our shortcomings, for it's in Jesus' name that we pray. Amen.
Okay, Matthew 25. If you've been a part of our recent classes, you know chronologically where we are in the time frame of this earthly ministry of Jesus. We're in this last week, and he's had the triumphal entry into Jerusalem, where the crowds have chanted praise to him, expecting him to create a physical kingdom again of Israel that would overthrow the Roman Empire, and that's not going to happen. They just don't understand his ministry. They don't understand the kingdom. And even from the beginning of the prophecies about the kingdom in the Old Testament, the emphasis has been on the fact that it was going to be different. You know, it was not like these worldly kingdoms that are physical and have borders and all of that kind of thing. But he's accomplishing certain things in this week that ought to be pointing out what's going on with it. And the confrontation with the Pharisees has escalated, and the Sadducees and the scribes and lawyers. And the disciples are becoming more and more fearful as the week is going on. And there's one in particular that we haven't read a lot about, but we will today, a little bit today. And he's actually becoming a little bit discouraged, maybe is the word that I will use. And that's because, like all of the others, he has this idea of what to expect as Jesus becoming this king. And if he becomes a king, who will they be? They're going to be his closest people, right? His inner circle or his advisors or whatever they were in a worldly kingdom. And so they're expecting that, and now he's paying attention and seeing this is not going the way that he was expecting it to go. And we've already been told, his name's Judas, by the way, if you hadn't figured out that's who I'm talking about. Over time, we have been told that he has been deceptive. He has been carrying money and taking some of it as it goes along. So you see his connection to physical. You know, he wants the physical, he wants the reward, and as this week has progressed, well, it's clearly not going a way in which Jesus is going to physically overthrow Rome and physically set up this kingdom. And so he is losing his drive to keep going in his discouragement, and that's going to come out today. But this confrontation with the Pharisees has ended by Jesus talking about Jerusalem and how he would have taken care of, and that's representative of a nation, by the way, of Israel. He would have provided for them. He would have brought them in, but they would not, and so they're empty. And so the disciples took that and they said, look, empty? I mean, look at the temples here, and it's majestic, and it's got great walls, and the city of Jerusalem is protected with walls. It's secure, and how's it possible that they could be empty? And he's explaining, we're not talking about physically, we're talking about spiritually. And so he says, but physically they're going to be destroyed because they're so empty spiritually, and they don't understand that, so they ask him about it. And he goes on to explain in Matthew 24 in the first 35 verses about the destruction of Jerusalem, what to expect, what they were going to be dealing with in the meantime, the delivery up to the leaders because of persecution for who they would become, you know, things of that nature. And of course, when they see the armies of Rome, led by Titus, encircling the city of Jerusalem, you got to know this is the time. This is when they're going to be destroyed. So he said, you got to get out and do it now. You know, if you're on the roof of your house and you see it, don't go downstairs and get anything and go. If you're out in the fields working, don't go back into the city. You're not going to make it if you do that. And of course, we know by history, Josephus, the Jewish historian, records that not a single Christian died in the destruction of Jerusalem. Now, I don't know how he qualifies that. I don't know his definition of, could somebody be saying they're a Christian and not living like it so they weren't paying attention? Maybe. I just know that Josephus records that none of the Christians died. And that's because these men did their job, which was to go out and tell people what God wanted them to tell them. So they were ready, and the destruction of Jerusalem happened. So in the second part of Matthew chapter 24, he changes and he has a contrast verse, and I told you about it in the original language because it really shows a greater significance in the contrast. He says, but of that day, that one, meaning, the days when all these things at Jerusalem were happening is one thing, but the day of the judgment of Christ is a completely different thing. And so he talks about the judgment day. And if you were here on Wednesday night, we dealt with, in Matthew chapter 25, more of a description about that. And it wasn't, in 24, he gave all kinds of signs for the destruction of Jerusalem, but in the latter part of 24, verses 36 and following, there were no signs for the second coming. They were always supposed to be ready. We are always supposed to be ready because there are no signs. It could happen at any time, like a thief in the night, and no one knows the day or the hour that day is going to occur. And so in 25, he starts talking about how we're prepared for that. Again, if you were here Wednesday night, one of the portions of this, there were parables there in chapter 25. He started with the parable of the 10 virgins, and both groups, the wise and the foolish, are in the kingdom. They're all a part of this body, and yet some of them were not prepared for the judgment day in this parable. And then he talked about, following that, beginning in verse 14, the parable of the talents. And I want to pick up on that one again because there was something I tried to explain on Wednesday night that as I went back to it following that, I don't think I got the point across that I wanted to make, and I need to do that in order to go into the last part of chapter 25 this morning. So the parable of the talents, there are three individuals, and they're all three given opportunity to serve their master, right? And it wasn't the same opportunity, but they were all given opportunity. And what determined, not who, I know who, the master, but what determined the amount of opportunity that they had? Their abilities, right? He gave them opportunity based on ability, which means the master didn't expect something from them that they were not capable of doing, right? Okay, and so the two of them worked, doubled what they had been given stewardship over, and the master comes back and he praises them for that, right? At judgment, he praises them. But that third guy, he was called the one-talent guy, and I think sometimes we criticize him or look down upon him for that, but that's never criticized in this text. In fact, nowhere in the Bible is anybody criticized for having too little ability. I think it's significant that we emphasize the fact that his problem was not his lack of ability. His problem was his fear. That's what the text said. He had a perception of his master that was not accurate, but what happened is that perception caused him in his fear to not do anything. Now, what I was trying to get across Wednesday night that I don't think I did a very good job with was what happens in our lives is that sometimes we have irrational fears. And I think that we actually pass those irrational fears down. If we as parents have irrational fears, our kids learn those fears because we teach them to be afraid of those things. And why I call them, there are some things it's rational to be afraid of, right? I think obviously, I use this one all the time because it's easy. If you see a coral snake in your yard, you're not going to go play with it, I would hope, right? Because you have a fear of saying, hey, this could be a bad thing, right? So that'd be bad. You get an alligator in your swimming pool, you're not going to jump in with him, right? Because that'd be a bad idea. That's a rational fear. But I'll tell you how this works. Matt's here. You may not know this, but Matt flies airliners, a commercial airliner. Do you know that people are more afraid of flying? He is afraid of failing. He says, look, I knew you expect things that you didn't do, and so I was afraid I wouldn't be able to live up to it. I might lose it, and so I saved this so that now you can have it back. And he said, you were wicked and lazy and foolish. Here's how that fits, and I'll do the easy one. If I came up to you, any of the men here, if I came up to you and said, listen, I'm not feeling so great, Rich is not feeling so great, we're going to need somebody to preach tonight. How many of you men would immediately have fear? I got news for you. You came up to me and did that, I'd have fear too. We're afraid of it, right? And what are we afraid of? Failure. We're afraid we won't do a good enough job, right? We're afraid that we won't do the job that ought to be done for God, right? Do you know that's why, my issue with anxiety from preaching, all that. That's my fear. I have this expectation, and I never live up to it. I never live up to that expectation. But does that cause you to stop? That should keep you driving, shouldn't it? That doesn't cause you to stop. That causes you to put your best into it, right? Okay, now that we know that about this one-talent man, Jesus kind of explains and applies that. But I want to ask you this. All three of those guys were in the same place. He's talking about the church here. He's not talking about the world. All three of these guys were in the same place, had the same opportunity. Two of them had been faithful because they probably were afraid too, by the way. Everybody is, and yet they kept going, but one of them was not. So we're not talking about as they stand before God, did they stand before God as a group? No, the expectations of this context are individual. Okay, so let's start reading now in verse 31. That one's been cast into outer darkness at the judgment, verse 30. Now verse 31. When the Son of Man comes in his glory and the holy angels with him, then he will sit on the throne of his glory. All nations will be gathered before him, and he shall separate them one from another as a shepherd divides his sheep from the goats. Let's stop there. Again, our context. He's told parables, and now he's emphasizing again we're in the same context. This context is about the judgment day, and I would also point out that it's in a context where he's carrying on the same thought, and we're not talking about judging the world here. The teaching of Jesus in this chapter is not about the world. In fact, one of the things that he had told his disciples was he didn't come here to judge the world, did he? Why not? The world already stood condemned. What he came was to save people out of that condemnation, right? And so now he says, when we're talking about the judgment day, he's not talking about the world anymore. He's warning people on the inside. The sheep and the goats are both a part of the flock of the shepherd. But he's got to separate them out now. So at the judgment day, he separates out the sheep and the goats. And by the way, either one of these a bad animal? I mean, it's not like, even this isn't even clean or unclean, which is something they would have struggled with under the old law. Under the old law, what if he'd have said, I'm separating the sheep from the pigs? Well, under the old law, you'd have got that one, right? One's clean, one's unclean. These are both clean. These are people in the church. Go ahead. Yep.
When I read this, I'm going to make an assumption that I grew up with both sheep and goats. And when you open the pen in the morning, all the goats will run out at the same time through the gate. They will kill one another to get out. But once they're out of the pen, they will run into any direction they can and eat up anything they can.
Yeah.
But the sheep, they'll stand in the pen. You have to physically go in and get them out. And when you use this story, it makes sense to me. The goats are just
on their own direction.
You cannot control them.
Which takes you back to John chapter 10, where Jesus talked about being the great shepherd,
and he said the sheep hear his voice, know his voice. He knows them by name. They follow the shepherd, won't they? But the goats won't. And that makes sense. You get to the judgment day, and you know which one's going to be separated out wrong here is going to be the one that went their own way. Did great things, by the way, but went their own way, not his way. Keep reading it. He will set the sheep on his right hand, but the goats on the left, and the king will say to those on his right hand. So who's he talking to? The sheep. Okay. The sheep are on the right, and here's what he says to them. Come, you blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. So what is he telling them? What's the statement that he's just made to them? Huh? This has been God's plan all along. That's one thing in it. Yep. They have inherited, right? They have the reward. They're entering into eternity, right? And they're entering into an eternal reward, right? And before the foundation of the world, this was God's plan, right? Not who, but what. Not who would be a sheep or a goat, but what would be the ones who would be saved. That's the same things Ephesians was talking about with election. God knew before the foundation of the world, he set into place those who will be Christians are going to be the ones who are going to enter in. Faithful Christians. So he says, enter in. Then he says, why? Starts with the connecting word there in verse 35. For, here's the answer as to why they were told to enter in. I was hungry and you gave me food. I was thirsty and you gave me drink. I was a stranger and you took me in. I was naked and you clothed me. I was sick and you visited me. I was in prison and you came to me. Now I want you to define everything that I just read into one simple person that we just read about? That's not a person. Who did we read about? Who did I talk about in our introduction? Our review. Go back to the parable right before this. The parable of the talents. There are 3 people. 2 of them are told they're rewarded because they were faithful. 1 is not. Which one fits what we just described? Or ones? Yeah, the 2 who did what the master asked them to do. The individuals who took the opportunity. I know we use talent for money because literally a talent was a coin. But he's saying the sheep are the people that in that parable, they'd be the wise virgins in the parable right before it. And they are the 2 people that had the talents that they took and actually did something with them. We're talking about opportunities. They were given the opportunity to do things based on their ability. So as they stand before God in judgment, what they hear is enter in, and here's why. You used your opportunities. You used your abilities. Now, how does that connect? And use what Yop just talked about. How does that connect to sheep?
Are led, and you have to follow. There you go. Who are they following? The master, the shepherd, the great shepherd,
which is Christ, right? So the time that they see all that he has done and the example he has set, I as an individual, if I'm going to be a sheep, I'm going to follow that shepherd, right? Which doesn't mean that I claim something. It means that I am something.
Comment made a remembrance that I have. 40 years ago, I was teaching a Bible class and talking about the sheep and the goats. And there was a 94-year-old woman at that time who said, I was raised on the farm, and my daddy would come out and he would say, all right, children, you go open the gate, let the cows out into the pasture. They'll go on their own. And he said he'd turn to her and he'd say, you go get the sheep. You're going to have to lead them because they will follow you.
Yep.
And that stuck with me for 40 years.
Yep. They won't follow everybody, will they?
No.
Yep. Yep.
Yep. So these people are the ones who followed.
Also with what Yop said, if they all started in the pen, they were all already his children.
Yeah, they're already the shepherd. They belong to the shepherd.
In
Yeah.
other words, this isn't how they became his children.
No.
This is how they acted.
This is what they did with the abilities and opportunities they had. Yes. Yes. Okay. So
these are individuals that are the 5 talent and the 2 talent that did what they were supposed to do, right? They followed the shepherd. Now listen to this. This is the best part for me. Verse 37. Then the righteous will answer him, saying, Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you drink? When did we see you a stranger and take you in, or naked and clothe you? Or when did we see you sick or in prison and come to you? And the king will answer and say to them, assuredly I say to you, inasmuch as you did it to one of the least of these, my brethren, you did it to me. Now here's the part that I love. They didn't even know it. Why that's significant is, I think that there are far too many people who are inside the church building, because they have to be there to check the box. They have to be there, right? Because if I'm not there, then I'm not going to get the box checked, and the elders are going to complain, or the preacher's going to complain, and I'm not going to sneak my foot into heaven. Okay, is that the reason to be here? Is that the reason to worship? Oh, yeah, we do it, but we do it because we follow the shepherd. We do it because we follow the shepherd. This is about actually becoming something. It's not about saying, you remember, I know that none of you were like me, but you remember when you were in school and you were a kid, I don't know, high school or something like that, and you got a big test coming up. We did this in preaching school even, by the way. You had a big test coming up, and here's what you wanted to know. You wanted to know what was going to be on the test, right? And they're telling you all this stuff, and you're saying, look, I just want to know what I need to know for the test. I don't need to know all this extra stuff. Just tell me how to pass this test, right? That's the way people view the life of a Christian. Too many people who actually claim to be Christians. Just tell me what's going to be on the test, and when I get there, I'll make it in. Because I'll do just what I got to do to. These people are not like that. They're not doing this because, well, I got to get into heaven. They're doing this because they're following the shepherd. They didn't even know it. They knew they were following him, but they didn't even know that they were serving him. And how was that serving him? If you serve others, you do serve God. Yep. Isn't that amazing? Isn't it amazing how these people, they became something and didn't even do it by checking the list? When we get to this place where I struggle with this as a preacher, I struggle with the sermon on attendance. I really do. Because I don't want to make anybody be here for anything. And so it's kind of hard to preach that sermon and say, you guys should be here Sunday night, or you guys should be here for Bible class, or you guys should be here Wednesday night, because God expects us to be here with his people and not forsake the assembly. Okay, is that what I want, or maybe does God want you to want to be here? Yeah. And
In your time to tell us the answer.
Yeah, and I'm giving you the answer to this.
yeah, it's about the fact that my shepherd is who I'm going to follow. And if I'm going to follow my shepherd, I should be in the presence of my shepherd, shouldn't I? And so I should want to be here. You hope that's the way it is with your kids, right? When they're growing up, you make them do some things, but you hope one of these days they're going to wake up and think, maybe brushing my teeth's a good idea, right? But you make them until they figure that out, right? And so that's what I'm talking about. As you become a sheep, what happens is our motivation changes, and we become something different because we just follow the shepherd. Okay, but there's another group here. Let's see, verse 41. Then he will also say, did any of you watch those singing shows like American Idol? Anybody watch American Idol? Yeah, you know how that begins with all those individuals stand up there and they do their blind, or whatever they are, their tryouts or whatever, and then they get into Hollywood Week, and then in Hollywood Week they all get up and sing, and then they line them up there, like 8 of them, and then they say, you step forward, and you step forward, and you step forward, and then they pause for dramatic effect, and they'll say something like, all the rest of you are going home. Well, if you're one of those people standing in that line, and they says, you step forward, and that guy next to you steps forward, and then they say, you step forward, and that guy next to you steps forward, what are you thinking? Uh-oh. Yeah, uh-oh. You're getting nervous, aren't you? Okay, that's these guys here. They've been listening to this. And he's just told the sheep, enter in because here's what you did. But I want to tell you something. Are there times that we have a false confidence in ourselves? Because we're pretty good people, aren't we? I mean, I'm a pretty good person, so surely God got to deal with me, right? Okay, these people have listened to this, and they listened why? Why are you entering in? Because you did all these things. Now listen to this. Then he will say to those on the left hand, depart from me, you cursed, into everlasting fire prepared for the devil and his angels. Now I want to stop there. Depart from me. That's bad. That's final. And it's to a destination that God doesn't even want you to go. I have heard many times in my life, especially since I've been a preacher, people say things like, well, a loving God would never cause somebody to suffer in hell for eternity. What he just said is God didn't cause this. In fact, what he said here is God didn't want this. Now, there are other passages to use, like Peter talking about God's patience, not willing for anybody to perish, but right here in this text, what did he just say about hell?
It was prepared for who? The devil. Hell wasn't prepared for you. Heaven was prepared for you.
But hell is where we choose to go when we don't follow the shepherd. And so this place that was created for the purpose of punishing the rebellion of the devil and those who followed him in the rebellion becomes the place of those who follow themselves or him in life. Depart from me into this place prepared for the devil and his angels. For, there's your connecting word again, I was hungry, and you gave me no food. I was thirsty, and you gave me no drink. I was a stranger, and you did not take me in. Naked, and you did not clothe me. Sick and in prison, and you did not visit me. That sounds exactly like the first list, doesn't it? Only difference is they didn't do it, and the first group did do it, right? But here's the thing. They had done it. Listen to what is said next. Then they also will answer him, saying, Lord, when did we see you hungry or thirsty or a stranger or naked or sick or in prison and did not minister to you? They had done the checklist. They just didn't see to follow the shepherd. So in their mind, these are just like the people who will be told to depart, I never knew you. And they say, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name? Did we not do many wonderful things in your name? Cast out demons in your name? These are people in the kingdom. And he says, depart from me because you didn't do these things. And they're thinking, well, I've got the checklist here. But the checklist is my way. Following the shepherd is his way. And guess what? They didn't see it any more than other people did. Naive.
In life, the most important thing to convince God is that we have to love each other. And we have to be good to each other. And we cannot be able to do that with each other. We don't want to fool God by telling him we did this that you told us to do when we did not do it among us. I agree with that completely with
one addition. I cannot let me or you or the world define what that love to each other is.
We're going to get to that.
Get to that. What I have to do is let God define that. I have to follow the shepherd. What does it look like when Jesus loves the 5,000 that were hungry? What does it look like?
He fed them, didn't he? He taught them.
Taught them and he fed them, didn't he? Okay, here's a harder one. What did it look like when Jesus loved the scribes and Pharisees? He took hypocrites and they were going to be lost. Is that less loving? It's the exact same loving because God is love. He is perfect in his love. So it's about this shepherd. It's about, listen, if I am afraid to fail him, I'm going to have the test answers. I'm going to have the checklist so that I can sit at home and say, okay, I was at worship 3 times last week. Well, 2 times at worship and 2 times at Bible class. That's good. Oh, and last week there was somebody in need and I helped them. So I got the checklist. I have to be able to measure myself out. But when I'm following the shepherd, I'm not looking at all that other stuff. I'm just doing what the shepherd would do, right?
So when you said that about Jesus and the scribes and Pharisees, it brings me back to another comment that you had made. If we are afraid to evangelize or talk to somebody about the gospel, we're the one-talent guy.
That's exactly where I'm going.
We're afraid to fail, so we don't. So therefore, we did not.
I'm not just evangelism, but that's certainly an area of application. I would say any access to reach out. See, here's what we need to understand. Our singular goal in honoring God is to follow the shepherd, right? And the single purpose of Jesus coming into this world was what? Seek and save the lost, right? Which means if we're going to follow the shepherd, that's our goal too, right? But here's the thing. What does that look like? And what it looks like is that I care about the souls that are out there in this world. And I have opportunity. If I have relationships with people, those relationships are affected by the fact that I'm following the shepherd. And they're going to see that, and they're going to know that. Otherwise, if I'm afraid, like Steve was just talking about, if I'm afraid, okay, if I talk to this person, I'm probably going to lose their friendship. I've buried my talent, haven't I? And my opportunity. And I'm not following the shepherd anymore. But I'll show up and check my list for Sunday morning. Right? You remember years ago, some of you were here then, years ago at the old building when we had that one, for a whole year, we had this plan in place where we had the 2 sand buckets on the pulpit. You guys remember that? And one of them was pink, because that was the only color I could find. And one of them was yellow, because when you call somebody yellow, that in the old days, that meant you were afraid, right? And what we did is we filled that yellow bucket up with shells. I went out to the beach and gathered as many shells as I could. I washed them, put them in that. And all we had to do all week is just anybody in our life that we came into contact with, friend, family member, somebody at the restaurant, coworker, whatever. If we just gave them the opportunity to talk about the church or invite them to worship services or something like that, when we came in, we kept count of that, and we moved those shells over. Was that checking a list? Is that what that was about? You know what it was about? It was about me finding out and figuring out that all the things that I do in my life have to have one purpose: to follow the shepherd, which means seek and save the lost, right? That doesn't mean every conversation has to be about Jesus. That means my conversations have to be like the shepherd so that they see the shepherd.
It tells us in the scriptures that being the good shepherd, he told us, if you love me, keep my commandments.
Yeah.
And then he says the greatest commandment of all is love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, with all thy soul, with all thy mind, and your neighbor as yourself.
Yeah.
If we manifest that in our daily life, we're not going to look at, well, did I do my checklist? Or, oh, there's the opportunity. I can be my Lord through me. Because he says, it's not I that lives, Christ that liveth in me. In Galatians, where Paul spoke about being a Christian.
Yeah.
If you do it out of love, everything is out of love.
Yeah.
Keeping commandments kind of loses itself when you do it because you love somebody. And
Yeah. You just do it, right? Right? You just do it. Now, I'm going to close with this, not close the class, because I actually have, that was supposed to be Wednesday night's class, so I've got some more to cover in the next 7 minutes. But I want to go back to this. I want to connect all this back to where you started with this. You open the gate in the morning, all the goats go running out, right? And the sheep don't. Does that mean they're not worried about eating? No, it means the shepherd hadn't led them there yet. So when the shepherd goes there, that's where they go. They follow the shepherd. Go ahead.
The thing that is very important is that we want to be sure that we be just like the way Jesus was.
Right.
He treated everybody the same.
Right.
And we must treat everybody the same, and we should keep in mind that every person should be treated fairly. Every person. You only choose one group,
Yeah.
one person,
Yeah.
and forget
Jesus
about
loved all. That's
you are
right.
wrong completely.
All right, let me move on. And I've got to skip a little bit. 26, verse 1. It came to pass when Jesus had finished all these sayings that he said to his disciples, you know that after 2 days is the Passover, and the Son of Man will be delivered up to be crucified. And the chief priests and scribes and the elders of the people assembled at the palace of the high priest, who was called Caiaphas, and plotted to take Jesus by trickery and kill him. But they said, not during the feast, lest there be an uproar among the people. Now, remember when they were coming up to Jerusalem for this week, and the disciples were all afraid? And he stops and he says, look, I'm going to just tell you, I'm going up here. They are going to betray me. They are going to beat me. They are going to spit on me, and they are going to kill me. Okay, he's just said it again. He said, look, we're there. Okay, now, he also, while he is telling this to his disciples, he knows what's happening behind the scenes. And what's happening behind the scenes is this discussion that he had in chapter 23 about these Pharisees being hypocrites in front of all the rest of the people of the Jews has pushed them over the edge. And so they've gone to the high priest, who's also mad because Jesus cleansed the temple, and that's the high priest. That's his authority, right? So they're all mad, and they all get together, and they decide, okay, we're done with this. Let's figure this out. Let's kill him. But we can't do it openly. We got to do it in some tricked out kind of way. We got to figure out a deceitful way to do this because we can't lose the people. Oh, and we can't do it during the Passover because that's going to look bad too, right? This is all about their perception, what they think the people want. Now go down to verse 14. No, they don't. And then one of the 12, called Judas Iscariot, went to the chief priests and said, what are you willing to give me if I deliver him to you? And they counted out to him 30 pieces of silver. So from that time he sought opportunity to betray him. So rumor gets around, right? People talk. People talk. And among the Jews, we've seen many occasions where people are talking about Jesus and what do people think, and everybody's trying to be secretive, but word's getting out, right? So people are talking, and so Judas hears that, and Jesus has just said to these guys, I'm about to die. Well, where does that leave Judas? Where does that leave any of the 12? If what he was trying to do is establish an earthly kingdom. All this time, all this hard work, all this sacrifice is worthless, isn't it? And so he says finally, well, if I'm not going to be important there, I might as well get what I can here. And so he goes and asks them, what do you give me? I'm on the inner circle. I know where he is. I know where he's going to be. I can make this happen. Turn over to Mark 14. Let's start in verse 12. Mark 14, verse 12. Now on the first day of unleavened bread, when they killed the Passover lamb, his disciples said to him, where do you want us to go and prepare that you may eat the Passover? So he sent out two. Now the parallel accounts tell us that's Peter and John. Sent out two of his disciples and said to them, go into the city, and a man will meet you carrying a pitcher of water. Follow him. And wherever he goes in, say to the master of the house, the teacher says, where is the guest room in which I may eat the Passover with my disciples? And then he'll show you a large upper room, furnished and prepared, and there make ready for us. And his disciples went out and came into the city and found it just as he had said to them, and they prepared the Passover. So has his ministry changed even though Judas has left and now made this offer? Has it changed even though the Pharisees and the leaders of the Jews have now gone over the edge and said, we're going to make this happen however we have to do it? Hasn't changed, has it? And he is the Passover lamb. And so as he's celebrating this last Passover where he's going to give these guys the last opportunity, including Judas, to get it, he says to them, here's evidence that he is who he claims to be. You go into this city and you're just going to see a guy walking around. He didn't cause it to happen. He's telling them what's going to happen. This guy's carrying a pitcher of water. Just follow him. And when he goes in his house, just go on in the house and ask the guy, hey, my master needs a place to celebrate the Passover. Let me ask you something. If all the males in Jerusalem, that are faithful obviously, have made it into Jerusalem, you think it's kind of hard to find a room? You want to go, what was it that was happening yesterday? Oh, yeah, yesterday. Yesterday was Coronation Day. Did you guys know that? Can you imagine trying to find a hotel room yesterday in London, England? They weren't available, were they? Okay, so imagine finding a place for 13 people to celebrate a Passover together in the city of Jerusalem at the last minute, but yet Jesus knew where it would be. What's that supposed to tell these guys? When I die in just a few hours, you don't forget that I told you on the third day I'll be back. If I know what's going to happen in this, I also know what's going to happen in that. So he's just trying to get them one more time to follow the shepherd. You see that? Okay, we're out of time. Let's close with a prayer. Father, we're thankful for the privilege that it is to be here this morning together, to study your word, to grow closer to you, to learn about following you as our shepherd. Help us, Father, to have the kind of hearts that are humble enough to trust in your direction, your guidance, your provisions. Help us to know, Father, that your way is always the right direction. Help us never to go our own way. Forgive us where we fail you. In Christ's name, amen.